So there might be times when you're working with TypeScript where you might not know what the type of a value might be. Say for example, receiving an unknown server response that you don't know the shape of. In these situations, we can use the any and unknown types that TypeScript offers. Any and unknown are very similar, but we'll walk through any first, and then I'll talk through the differences between any and unknown. Okay, I think the best way of explaining how to use any is probably by example, so let's start by explicitly declaring a string. Next, we'll change the explicit type from string to use a new type, any. Any is a special type, which tells the TypeScript compiler that our value can be of any type whatsoever, hence the name any. So if it can be of any type, that means that we should be able to reassign it to be a number. We could reassign it to be a boolean, or we could even reassign it to be a whole new object. The TypeScript compiler will be satisfied with all of this code and compile with no problems. At this point, you might be getting a sense of déjà vu. This is almost the exact behavior that we're used to when writing JavaScript. We've lost that strong typing behavior that TypeScript is known and used for by defining our value type as any. As a result, we should really only be using any as a last resort. Let's take a look at one more example to demonstrate how using any can be quite dangerous. Because our value has been defined as any, the TypeScript compiler completely ignores any type checking around this value. That means that we could even call a function that doesn't exist on this value, and TypeScript would still deem this as valid code and compile it with no problems. This is bad. The sayHello function doesn't exist on our value, and so we would run into unexpected behavior and errors at runtime when our code was executed. In this example, the correct thing to do would be to type our value as a string. So let's fix this. That's much better. Okay, let's move on. Like I said earlier, unknown is very similar to any, but I really want to cover the differences before we move any further forward. Unknown is deemed as the safer version of any. That might be a little bit confusing, so I'm going to try and cover the differences in some examples. Here's an example where we're declaring a constant with the type of any and a variable with the type of string. Because my value is of any type, TypeScript optimistically assumes that this could be a string, and therefore we would be allowed to reassign string value to my value. This code example would make its way through TypeScript's compiler with no errors. However, if we change the type of my value to be the type unknown, this would be deemed as invalid code and would not pass through TypeScript's compiler. So where any takes a more optimistic approach of what type it could be, unknown takes a more pessimistic approach and assumes that the value will not be a string. This example shows how unknown can be a little safer than using any. Alright, let's cover one last example showing one more difference between any and unknown. Remember how I said earlier that we could call any function on an any value even if the function doesn't exist? Thankfully, if we use the unknown type instead of the any type, unknown will pessimistically assume that the value does not have any functions and therefore TypeScript will fail to compile. If you're wrestling with an unknown server response or just need to get TypeScript compiling again quickly for debugging purposes, any and unknown can both be valuable tools to use when used correctly. But like I said at the top of this chapter, the two should be used as infrequently as possible in production code because they strip back a lot of the type safety that TypeScript was built to offer. As a rule, we should be typing every single one of our values inside of our app, but when that's not possible, we can use any and unknown as a bit of an ejector seat. Okay, that's enough on the slides. Let's have a look at an example inside of the editor. So in a perfect world, in a perfect TypeScript codebase, everything would have a type. But right now, that won't always be the case. There are going to be situations that you encounter whilst using TypeScript where you're going to need some kind of an ejector seat. And in those situations, this is where we can introduce the two remaining types, any and unknown. And in this video, I'm going to be walking through those step by step. So to demonstrate what these two types do, let's create a brand new file in our src folder, and let's call it any-unknown. .ts. I'm going to open our terminal with Command J, and I'm going to type in yarn tscw so that I am watching our folder, and we are all set to go. So before we get started, I'm just going to disable ESLint for this file, and we're going to declare a variable which is going to have the any type. So let's go my any variable, declare it as any. And let's just close it there. That's not actually, let's not assign it anything right now. So the any type is literally exactly what it sounds like. It can be any type whatsoever. So let's assign it to a string. So hello there. And while we're here, let's also reassign it to a number. And let's also reassign it once again to an object. So let's say greeting, hello there. Oops. So to recap, we've actually just created a variable of the type any, we've assigned it a string, we've assigned it a number, and we've also assigned it an object. The way that I see the any type is it is an ejector seat. It gives us that exact same functionality that we're used to in JavaScript, but at the cost of losing all of the type safety that we get with TypeScript. And as far as I'm concerned, it should only be used as a last resort. And because any is literally every single type simultaneously, it is a number, it is a string, it is an object. We can actually access properties on this variable that don't exist. So property. For example, if I assign this constant property to my any variable does not exist, and then hit save, TypeScript doesn't have any problem with this because the any type could have a property on it called does not exist. To expand on that as well, we could also, my any variable, we could also call a function like say hello on it. That doesn't exist also. However, this is valid TypeScript. And now I hope you can sort of start to see the dangers of using any, because this is going to cause runtime errors in wherever it's been deployed to. And again, it eliminates the whole type safety element of TypeScript. Okay, so now that we've walked through any, let's talk about the similar but ever so slightly different unknown. So let's declare one called my unknown variable. And let's assign my unknown variable to a string. So let's go do the same thing that we just did previously and go hello there. That again is totally fine. Very, very similar to any in exactly the same way. The type is unknown, therefore it once again it could be a string, it could be a number. We could do the same thing that we did earlier on where we assigned it to the number one because again the type is unknown. And again, just mirroring the same behavior that we had just above, I'm going to go my unknown variable. I'm going to also assign it to an object, greeting hello there, just to keep everything exactly the same. And again, this is all valid TypeScript, but we lose all of that type safety. The difference with unknown, however, is if I try to access a property on my unknown variable, so property unknown, my unknown variable does not exist, this does throw an error. And the reason for this is because TypeScript introduced the unknown type as a way to introduce a slight amount more safety than the any type. In exactly the same mindset, we also can't call any functions on our unknown variable because it is unknown. So if I try to call the say hello function on my unknown variable, that too reports an error. There may well be times where you need to use any or unknown, perhaps from like an API call where you're uncertain of what the type that the server is going to return with. In those situations, try to use unknown over any because it gives you a slight amount more safety than the any type does. But if that doesn't work, then you may just have to fall back to any. And just to really drive it home, the any and the unknown types should really be used as a last resort. Okay, I'm just going to remove these 2 lines so that our code compiles once again, and that is going to do it for the any and unknown part of this video guide.